So today, we're going to do a season preview for the Golden State Warriors next season, the 2023-2024 season. And we're going to also discuss Steve Kerr last season and his strengths, weaknesses, expectations for next season as well. So let's get right into it. Starting with the team breakdown last year, last season's record and advanced stats. So last season we were 44-38 in the regular season, which ended up being fourth in the Pacific Division, sixth in the entire Western Conference. Our offensive rating was 115.1, which ranked 10th. And we were a slightly top half defensive team at 113.4 defensive rating, 14th overall. Our net rating bordered around top 10 at plus 1.7, so we ranked 11th there. And overall, these advanced numbers are not necessarily indicative of a championship team. They're indicative of a very good team, but not a team that's necessarily equipped to win a title consistently year in, year out. You're looking at net rating being around the top 1 to 4. You're looking at defensive rating and offensive rating being around 5 or 6, right? So we just fell short of what a championship team requires statistically, like fitting a championship profile. And I kind of went through every season of each championship team before this. I did this a while ago, and I kind of outlined the main indicators that go into the statistical profile of a championship team. And this season, we just didn't meet those standards. We didn't meet those prerequisites. And so you could have just looked at kind of where we finished in terms of the numbers and concluded that, it would be an uphill battle in terms of winning the title last year. And then just to dive into it a little bit more specifically because of how extreme the difference between our road and home record was. So we were 33-8 at home. We were one of the best home teams in the NBA. Our defensive rating at home ranked third in the entire NBA at 108.4. But we were 11-30 on the road, where our defensive rating was 28th across the NBA at 118.3. So a huge drop off, obviously, from the home to road splits. The struggles we've kind of chalked up to a multitude of reasons: focus, chemistry, connectivity, decision making, rest, all these things, right? Load management, all that stuff. Injuries. So, of course, it's a multivariate analysis, right? You can't necessarily chalk it up to one or two things. There's a bunch of factors that go into why season happened the way it did. But at the end of the day, we were not a championship team. And Steve Kerr said that at the end of his, press conference after Game 6 versus the Lakers. I believe Draymond and Steph reiterated that sentiment as well. This team just did not fit the statistical or visual profile of what a championship team should look like by the numbers, but also as a fan, just looking and seeing, are we able to play consistently across, multiple games, right? We weren't. We didn't have that many. Our longest win streak was 5 games, and we happened to have it twice without Steph. That should have been a concern as well. So you kind of saw all the indicators and markers last season, but obviously we still held that belief in the core, but we were never able to put it together the way we expected it to. Now, finally, just with the team breakdown, the playoff finish, we ended up losing to the Lakers in 6 games in the second round, the conference semifinals. And there's 3 important takeaways I took from that series. The first of which, this is the first time in the core era we lost the playoff series when Steph, Clay, and Draymond, when the core started every game, right? So that had been a streak that had lasted every season, every series, every year up until last season, right? The streak of 28 consecutive playoff series with a road win was snapped as well. So we had 28 straight series with at least one road win, but that obviously snapped as well. We lost game 3 and 4 in LA, and then we obviously lost game 6. That game 4, I really felt we should have won. I think a lot of us look back, and that's kind of a game we kind of want back. Obviously that was the biggest game of the series, right? The difference between 2-2 going home and 3-1, right? And you're basically on the brink of elimination. So that was definitely a tough one. And then obviously we lost to a we lost a Western Conference playoff series for the first time in the Steve Kerr era. So we had never lost in the West, right? I mean, we had never lost before the finals in the years we made the playoffs in the Steve Kerr era, right? So you look at 2015, made the finals, 2016 made the finals, 2017 made the finals, 2018, 2019 we made the finals, and then 2020 we missed the playoffs, 2021 we missed it, 2022 we made the finals. Last season was the first season we didn't make the finals in the Steve Kerr era in a season that we made the playoffs. So obviously it's unfortunate that these things, these streaks snapped and we weren't able to necessarily put together a team that we could be proud of last year, but there's reasons to be optimistic next season. So do you guys want to add anything to that, by the way? Any information with how last season, whether statistically or just the eye test and kind of what you guys saw last season? You want to add anything to that, Shadow, Urkel, Goldie?
I think. Go ahead.
I just want to say people because of course they're still in this run. I think there's a shot of them winning more, but just to say from 15 to 22 they won undefeated in Western Conference series is crazy. Like just that in itself, and every series where before he has started they've won. Just to say that, that's a crazy accomplishment in itself, right? You look at the Spurs, they were dominant for a long time, but there were also years where they were lost, they were in and out, right? And they didn't have the record we had, right? Undefeated whenever Steph, Clay, and Draymond started in every series. I just want to say that in itself is a crazy accomplishment that I don't really see people bring up more, and we should really appreciate it, man. This shit is special. This is once in a generation type of thing. This doesn't happen very often. Even if you look at the Spurs, there were years where they were healthy and didn't win, but with us, every year, so in the current era, obviously they were healthy. The core three started every game. They were undefeated until this year, and you could say this year there's multiple reasons for why, roster construction, the punch, just so many reasons went into that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that that's a crazy accomplishment.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you providing that widened scope of what we've been able to accomplish over this run. Absolutely, this is unprecedented, right? This isn't something that is an everyday occurrence, right? Having a team this dominant over this stretch of time. Absolutely, I appreciate that perspective. Goldie, were you going to say anything?
I was just going to say I think it's just insane the difference between our defense on the road versus at home, going from
Yeah, that
3rd to
shit was
28th.
crazy, bro.
I
I don't know
think
how we did that.
I think it's a positive that we were top 10 in offense, because in 2022 and 2021 we were bottom 15. I believe both years. I think we were bottom 10 in 2021. So I think it's a positive that we were able to go up, even with Wiggins and Steph both missing a lot of time. But the road struggles, I don't see that really happening again. I think that's just a crazy anomaly from last season. So it's really comforting seeing that at home we were still a top 3 defense.
Yeah, I was gonna actually say pretty much the same thing as Goldie, as far as the defense on the road versus at home, and yeah, the main thing, right, when you look at good defensive teams is they play great defense on the road as well as home, and I would say the road is the actual real test for a good defense, and yeah, being 28th clearly shows you that despite us being, I believe our defensive rating used to have their 14th, um, it was kind of a hoax, right? In that being 28th on the road is probably more indicative of our actual true, defensive shortcomings rather than the third at home. And the other thing I was just going to add too is one good thing about last season, which is probably also a factor of the small ball and the spacing in that direction that we went with, was we did actually have our highest assists per game total um, since 2019. So that was a bit of a positive, but yeah, I do think that is partially accounted for due to the difference in style that we were playing on offense. and
I
more
mean,
things.
well, I actually want to add on to that. I'm glad that you mentioned the assist thing because you know what's crazy. Even though that is the case, the sheer amount of turnovers we threw were embarrassing. I don't know if you watched like we all watched Warriors basketball last year. Like it was bad. Not to mention the shot selection, it was horrendous. Like I think Steph said it himself. We were shooting like 43s. Like it was terrible. Like all we did was chuck up threes. It was really bad. We just stayed behind the 3-point line like a high school team. Like that's what we did.
Yeah,
That's
and to add stats to that too, right? So this was also the highest amount of threes we've attempted in the Steve Kerr era, with 43. The previous highest was last year at 39. And also to go along with that, the highest amount of turnovers we've averaged in the Steve Kerr era
yep.
at 16.3. The previous highest was in 2018 when we averaged 15 and a half.
Ridiculous.
And to also note, all of the other defensive metrics were also down as well, in that this is the lowest amount of steals we've averaged, at 7.2. The previous lowest was 7.6 in 2019. And blocks as well, at 3.94 round up. And the previous lowest was last year. And not to mention, this is also the highest amount of personal fouls per game we've had, in the Steve Kerr era as well. So all of these are,
The
very,
personal fouls. Do you know the number on the personal fouls?
yes, 21.4
Previous
and
highest being?
21.2 in 2021. So
which was
correlates
the year we missed the
Gosh.
playoffs. We were a play-in team
exactly,
that year.
exactly. Yep.
And it's funny the similarities were striking between last season and the play-in year. Actually, we kind of were able to find those common threads from a statistical standpoint, and also just watching the games. Draymond and Steph not being as impactful a two-man lineup as they were in 2021. So that's a really good indicator right there of another parallel that we can kind of identify between the 2021 season and this season.
Yep.
Or
And
this last season. Yeah.
yep. And God damn it. Yeah, one last thing that I think might not be a Warriors thing, but uh, maybe is a more of an indicator around the league, is that this is also the highest field goals we've attempted, in the years, at 90.2. The previous highest was in 2018, 2019, which, obviously, I don't know how.
The game's getting faster.
Yeah,
Probably.
exactly. Like, considering the 2018-19, how outmatched, or how much we outmatched other teams, right? It's kind of crazy to think that we were, almost getting to that total having such a bad defense, right? It's basically indicative of the pace of the NBA. Like, I don't know who said that, but yeah, like the pace of the NBA increasing.
Is it See, the last time I looked at it, I thought that I saw that the overall pace of the league had gone down, but the pace of the Warriors had shot up relative to the rest of the league.
I mean,
That would
I wouldn't
also
I wouldn't be surprised because of how small we are. Like we would definitely need to be faster. I think we were leaning more into our speed because we didn't have size to go off and strength. So I would imagine I wouldn't be surprised at all.
What do the free throws numbers look like? So we were fewest in attempts, right? I'm pretty sure.
I feel like that's halfway our fault and
So
halfway not though.
Right.
free throw attempts I have here. These are the second lowest I see. The lowest was the first year of Steve Kerr, 2014-15 at 20.8. Or actually, no, I take that back. This is the lowest amount of free throws we've shot, at 20.2. The second lowest was in 2019. A lot of correlations there, at 20.4. But our free throw percentage it's roughly been the same. So yeah, we were still punishing people on
So
the free throw.
attempts were just very low. League wide, we were like 30th, right? We were dead last.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help when you're giving up. Would you say last season? What were we relative to the league in terms of fouls? The most.
Yeah.
So we fouled the most and we got to the line the least, right? I mean, that's a losing formula. Shadow, did you want to add anything to just overall last season or anything like that?
Well, the things that I got to add are things like context. Well, getting back onto Steve Kerr, Steve Kerr didn't really hold people accountable. It was one of those years that, like, by the same token, they were coddling Poole and making sure he was good. They weren't holding Draymond Green accountable and getting it together. Even in the exit meeting, Steve Kerr said, "I didn't do a great job in being connective and connecting guys together, and whatnot." And also, the main thing I feel that all this stems from is, one, the bench, two, the culture. So we spoke about the road record, and I think everybody knows the old adage that role players don't travel well on the road. So it's not crazy to know that role players at home are more comfortable. They got the home crowd. They know their baskets. They have the confidence of everybody on the team. And going on the road is tiring. People go out. They're fatigued, and a lot of the guys, though we had a bench, our bench was very young in minutes played, not necessarily young in age, but young in minutes played, meaning that they didn't have a lot of NBA experience. Like Ty Jerome didn't have the most NBA experience in game. Anthony Lamb didn't have the most NBA experience in game, and it showed. And those and have playing G League players showed up, and that is why we're here today, because we're speaking on Steve Kerr, good or bad. You know what I'm saying? So I think that was a very big detriment this year. One, the culture. Um, I could give you context and let you guys know the punch did affect the overall atmosphere and the vibe. You know, when people are in a room, or like people who have beef with each other are in a room, the tension is always thick, and the tension was like that all year. Well, All-Star break, they came back and everybody tried to be like fresh and have a better mindset and come in and be closer together, because they had like a little break and everybody spoke to each other. They were in group chats trying to prep each other up, and you guys saw that, because you know the Warriors started getting better as the season progressed, and they started making changes and making headway. But I think the environment that Steve Kerr um, enabled, I think that was a detriment to the team most of all, out of anything, because you know Steve Kerr is the head of the snake, and culture drives um, what a team is or isn't. So I think that was a huge detriment. If I was to add anything, I'm just giving you the context of, like, Steve Kerr himself said he did a poor job. The players weren't exactly satisfied with what Steve Kerr was doing, and the whole trust aspect of Draymond. Even though everybody was like, "Yo, Draymond, the dog, we got you," and everything, like they didn't really trust him. That wasn't there. They didn't go out. There was no outings. They didn't go to dinner. They didn't go bowling. The wives hung out with each other, but the guys didn't come around. It was like more or less the wives were like just doing their thing, and the players were doing their thing, and it wasn't indicative of a championship
Didn't feel like
atmosphere.
a family, right?
Yeah, it didn't feel like a family. It was definitely wasn't a championship atmosphere.
100%, hundred
And
percent. No,
if you need any tangible evidence as to what Shadow was saying, literally on paper, look at our defensive rating on the road. Right. We know that we had the problems that we had from an X to the nose standpoint. Right. We had certain guys who were, when they were on, when they were off, they were really contributing to a net defensive negative rating. Right. We know all of that. Right. But we were able to mask a lot of those individual defensive deficiencies at home because we had Chase Center, we had the crowd to lift up the team. But when shit would hit the fan on the road and coverages were blown, you see heads dropping, you see fingers pointing, and dudes, you know, acting up a certain type of way on the sidelines and all of that stuff over the course of the season. You see that 11-30 on the road. You see the 28th defensive rating on the road. That's literally an exact effect of what Shadow is saying playing out on the court. So you don't need to look any further than that for evidence on the court.
Honestly, just to say one last thing, because I know we're doing the 23-24 season today. All I gotta say is heads up, because the fact that all of this, like all these problems that we've been discussing for these last couple of so minutes, we still somehow, some way made the playoffs, knocked out the best offense in the league, the loudest arena in the league, like basically the hardest arena to play in, and then gave the Lakers run for the money post trade deadline, despite having like the most dysfunctional team I've ever seen. if we fix like half those problems, the league's in trouble. That's all I have to say.
I like that point because I was thinking the same thing. Like, this is why I say every Steph Curry team is greater than the sum of its players, because somehow, some way, Steph finds a way to maximize the team beyond its capabilities. So this team probably should have lost in the first round last year, right? Game 7 on the road, tough environment, and somehow he drops 50 points and pushes us over the top. But we did max out. We did max out in the second round. We just capped out. We couldn't give any more. We just weren't a better team than a second round exit. But you're right. Even after everything that had happened, the ups, the downs, the instability, all of the issues, the body language, yet and still we made a valiant effort at the end of the day. We definitely left it out there. Urkel, I just want to say really quickly. So I know last season, early on, like I was pretty concerned, especially when we were losing. Like I remember that one game against the Kings. I was pretty panicked. I was like, this does not look like a championship team. This team does not necessarily look like they're engaged and invested in winning. They're not making the right decisions. They're not focused. Did you see those similar stuff like early on, and like what did you see throughout the season that concerned you last year that kind of we need to correct for next year?
I seen it pretty early actually. I saw it really early. So game 2 against Denver, I saw how they were just getting cooked on defense. But then I was like, all right, it's Jokic and all of this stuff, but that game, bro, like they just got absolutely roasted on defense. And I didn't like that trend. They looked okay in the preseason and all of that, but like that second game that they played, man, they just got annihilated on defense, and then it started to become even more glaring when they went on the road, and it was just bum teams, and they didn't look connected defensively and all of that. But where I was holding out hope is because I saw other teams, like over the years, do the same exact thing, like championship teams. But that last year, it was kind of weird because you know you would see ups and downs from these championship teams. You know what I'm saying? And I kept on referencing the Rockets and all of this stuff, right? It was that same mentality, and I was saying that all year long. And then we had the Wiggins stuff, we had the Steph stuff, like guys were in and out of the lineup, all of that stuff, and then we had like the front office and all of that. So eventually, I thought they had enough moxie to figure it out and to get there. But where I started to lose hope is when, after Wiggins came back and they sat Kuminga and all of that. Like I started to become real weary when I saw 3 guards were coming off of the bench. That's where I thought it got dicey. I think if it weren't for that, and I think if they had like the thing to fall back on about simply just liking each other, I think they probably could have figured it out. But I just felt like it was just way too many factors. The dynamic was weird, to really overcome that. Because, bro, like, if you look at the teams that made the West Finals, they were like playing teams, dog. Like, so I wasn't too far off, but the problem was that like the roster management was just you know the roster management was just stupid. Like when we think about it, it just didn't make any sense. And
Yeah,
going forward,
hockey lineups, right? Even just
yeah,
starting.
like the hockey lineups to start the season off, that was pretty dumb. And then when they brought back GP2, don't get me wrong, like I think in the long run, GP2 was the right play. But then we got into a situation where we had Dante, and then it was Dante, GP2, Jordan Poole off of the bench, and it was just a nightmare. You know what I'm saying? Like it just didn't, it just didn't work that well. And then it forced like chemistry issues and all of that. This season you saw where, we're seeing Kuminga emerge now. This is year 3 of Kuminga. This is year 3 of Moody, so I feel a little bit better. But last year we started off the year and then Kaminga was sitting on the bench. I was like, why was he sitting on the bench? And then you heard it was like at the expense of James Wiseman. James Wiseman fucking sucks. Why is Kaminga, who was playing all year long, sitting at the expense of James Wiseman? You know what I'm saying? And then why was he sitting, in various parts of the year, him and Moody, and then all of a sudden Moody is gonna play? Like it made no sense. It made absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
So
Shadow was kind of referring to that, like how Steve was winging it, like even in the playoffs, you know?
yeah, and in a weird way, I felt like Steve kind of lost the locker room. I'm gonna be dead honest with you. Like I think there's a portion of the locker room that he lost. The vets are always going to be on his side or whatever, because you can clearly tell that he leaned with the vets, and and he just lost the young guys, right? And it just created a bad environment, right? So I think he had a hand in that, and let's hope going forward, that he has a plan and he has defined roles for guys this year, right? Like, but at the same time, I don't think the front office put him in a good position either, right? Like, they have this grandiose plan that grandiose plan just didn't work. And I feel like you need young guys on the team, but there is a point of diminishing returns when you start to go over the top with some of these moves. And I felt like the front office just went over the top. It was just dumb. Point blank simple, right? So um, if we can just get back to the point where they're connected, I think you start to see some of those defensics metrics shoot up again, because they're not like a high end talent team. The numbers in 21 and the numbers in 23 are similar because the Warriors rely on connectivity. If they are not connected, they're going to look like a bad team.
100% agree. 100% agree. Um, yeah, go ahead. No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. All right. I'm going to get into Steve's strengths. And some of these he didn't deliver on last year, of course. So I'm going to go line by line. But for the most part,
Wait,
yeah.
were these weaknesses you were just talking about?
No. We were just speaking in general how last season unfolded. And
Sam is like,
Uh,
send me the PowerPoint after.
I fell in.
Send me the PowerPoint after.
I fell asleep in. I fell asleep in class. I didn't take the notes. Just send me the PowerPoint. Yeah, but I'm just gonna say, so basically with Steve's strengths, like these strengths basically are the common denominators throughout this run, right? So maybe these don't apply to last year, and some of these don't for sure. But I think altogether they all encompass his typical general year to year, season to season strengths on that regular basis. And I'm not gonna allow 1 year to kind of take away from what I've seen from him over the course of this dynasty. So to start off, defining player roles, which is something he literally did not do at all last season, right? And so that's one of his strengths, and that's something that he's going to have to do a better job of next year, is defining player roles, setting expectations, and creating positive group dynamics in terms of being on the same page, creating an understanding between players and rotations, coach, the staff, and having that level of communication so that everybody is able to, embrace their role, what Shadow likes to say, be a star in their role, and ultimately allowed the team to be greater than the sum of its players, right? So you have to set those expectations early, right? You can't necessarily just throw players out there and expect them to work. You have to assign specific roles given their skill sets within the system, and attempt to tweak, adjust, and adapt throughout the season. Maybe along with some experimentation, but Steve really did not do a good job of this last season. He kind of just threw some lineups last season to start off and expected it to work out, but players weren't ready. He obviously employed the hockey substitutions, so it wasn't necessarily a smooth start to the year last year. So he needs to do a better job next season of defining roles, setting expectations early on so that everybody understands what's required of them on a night-to-night basis, and then that'll in turn create positive group dynamics, because now you understand the what's required of you, so you don't expect more shot attempts or to play more minutes or to get more touches, or you know what I'm saying. And so there needs to be a level of understanding between coaching staff, players, and then among the group overall, just so there's a greater sense of what's demanded of each individual. And then obviously throughout the years, he's been a very good people manager, right? He's had to manage different personalities, different players, different, even within the front office, you have your owner like Joe Lacob, you have the former GM Bob Myers. So he's had to adjust and adapt based on who he is speaking to, who he's trying to explain himself to, who he is communicating to, right? So he's not speaking to Steph Curry the same way he would speak to Draymond. He's not speaking to Draymond the same way he's speaking to Clay. He's not speaking to all three of those guys the same way he'd speak to KD. And obviously, he's having different conversations with different players, right? In terms of role, he may speak to role players more about their roles because they may see some DMPs. They may not see as much playing time. They may see a decrease in minutes. So he's going to have to be, transparent about where his mind is at, what he's expecting of them, more so with those types of players, right? And so this is a way of empowering the team and empowering the players, is being open, being honest, being transparent with how how you plan to coach the team, and having to manage different players and people. And is exactly what we harped on in the previous slide, which is he did a poor job of that last year. He was not a good people manager. He did not empower his players, right? Guys like James Wiseman early into the season, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody in the middle and end of the season, right? And then obviously guys like Draymond and Clay, who were getting away with things that Steve didn't feel comfortable expressing his displeasure with, right? We talk about the punch. We can talk about Clay and his shot selection and his shot hunting early on, right? All of these things kind of add up, and it creates a broken, fractured locker room that's not connected, which is what Steve ended up reflecting on in his interviews after the season, which is essentially, I failed at connecting this group last year. So that's a big thing. And I kind of added that bullet towards the end there. I said he identifies with role players. This isn't coming out of my mouth. Steve Kerr, on the record, you can look up the quote, said, I identify with role players more than I do with star players. So again, he tends to be more of a guy that caters to 6 through 10 or 6 through 13 on a roster, as opposed to 1 through 5, right? And that's because he was a guy that came off the bench. He was a guy that was a role player. He was somebody that understood the pressures that come with that, having to hit a shot, because you understand you only have so many shot attempts per game, right? If you have less shot attempts, those shots, by nature have more pressure, with each attempt. So he kind of, obviously being a former player, being a former role player, he's going to empathize with those who are in the position today with what he was tasked to do with decades ago. So this has yielded positive results. We can talk about guys like JaVale McGee and Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala to a lesser extent, right? Throughout this dynasty, Otto Porter, GP2, David West. And some of these guys are veterans, some of these guys are younger players, but you can look throughout the years and say there's been a lot of great role players under Steve Kerr off the bench. And even Jordan Bell for a limited period of time, he gave us some good minutes. Kevon Looney was off the bench for many years, right? So you got to understand, like, he's going to gravitate more towards a role player's type of, that kind of role on a team and that kind of expectation. So, of course, he's going to be, more receptive and more accommodating to those types of players, having been one himself. And then the motion offense. He's the architect behind his particular motion offense. Obviously, he adopted from the Popovich tree, and obviously, I think didn't Shadow. Do you want to expand on this a little bit? You said the Princeton concepts, and other coaches throughout the years. Shadow can do a better job of me explaining the origin and the basis behind the motion concepts and the offense that Steve kind of put together. Shadow, are you there?
Tex Winter, Phil Jackson, triangle offense.
Right, exactly. So Tex Winter, Phil Jackson, the triangle, adopting these different concepts, adopting these different
Weak strong
philosophies.
from San
Yep.
Antonio.
Yep. Exactly.
San Antonio.
So he kind of adopted and took away all these different philosophies and tried to put his own spin on it, right? And so he didn't necessarily just take one or two things. He took a bunch of different ideas and he kind of, adapted and adopted his own version of that. So, and he adapted over time, of course. The same playbook we run today is not what we ran in 2015. So over time, he's kind of looked at the league, looked at his, his team and the skill sets that are presented. And he has, to some extent, to a limited extent, he has made changes, but obviously we'll get to that a little bit later. And then, like I said, the motion offense, the constant player and ball movement, his idea is that if players are involved and they feel like they're touching the ball and moving the ball and they feel like everybody is equal within the offense, that it will yield positive results overall because it'll connect them better on defense, right? If they're more engaged, they're more, in tune and in sync with one another, because on offense, there's a psychological reinforcement. There's a positive reinforcement when you have the ball in your hands and you're not just standing in the corner and watching, right? If you're always moving, if you're always, if on any given play, you can take that shot or you can make that read, like, it's going to create greater investment on the defensive end. And so that's kind of his psychological philosophy behind these concepts is you want everybody to feel involved and integrated within the team concept. And then obviously, creating the best shot possible doesn't hurt, right? If your players are moving and the ball is moving, then you're generally going to create the best shot because the defense has to move, right? And so if you're not having guys stand around, you're making the defender's job more difficult, right? If you have the ball swinging from side to side, players cutting, setting screens, the various weak side and secondary actions occurring throughout the course of a game, then it puts pressure on the defense to think about how they're going to react, because this is a read and react offense. So if you're reading and reacting, then that means that the defense has to also, do that simultaneously. And they have to now recover and take into account different counters you may have, whether it be slipping the screen, a dribble handoff, a fake dribble handoff, a pin down, a curl, a back cut, right? All of these things within the offense, because you are reading and reacting yourself, it puts the defense at an inherent disadvantage where they have to then be more proactive. They have to be more familiar with your play calls, your sets, the tendencies that you have within each action that you run. All of these things make it more difficult and puts the responsibility and a lot of pressure on the defense to have to recover and rotate and react to the motion of not only the ball but the players itself. So this idea in theory and in practice is one that has been proven, and in a vacuum, it is definitely a big reason why it has a big hand in the success that we've had in this run. And then I also mentioned his relationship between coach and superstar, right? Steph Curry, we all know he's a guy that's unselfish. He's going to listen to his coach. He's not going to have much friction. He's somebody that's going to embrace the team concept just as a human being, because he's not someone that's going to try to take all the credit or take all the shots or have the ball in his hands for 20 out of the 24 seconds in a given possession. Make every play, bring the ball up every time. Steph's unselfish nature and Steve's humility blend well together from a personality standpoint. Now, of course, they're human beings. They want to, they have their own egos. They have their own core values and beliefs as to how things should be done. But what makes them coexist and thrive as a pairing of a coach and superstar, it's similar to Popovich and Duncan, right? Because you need to have that chemistry, and you need to have that communication between both. If that doesn't exist, then it basically breaks the team from the top down, because at that point, if the star isn't receptive to the coach's demands or the coach's even requests, or kind of how they want to, the philosophy with which they want to run the team, then it kind of loses everybody else on the roster, because everybody's looking at the star player to embrace and to buy in to those ideas, right? So you have to have buy-in, right? And so that's the one big thing with Steph, is that they built the system around Steph, of course, the on and off ball hybrid motion offense, right? And essentially what they did was they found a winning formula, and they found it pretty early. And so having Steph play off the ball sacrifices touches, sacrifices possessions, shot attempts, and all of those things that a star player traditionally wants to have and wants to be able to, have responsibilities with, just to produce greater outcome in terms of stats or all-star appearances or MVP considerations or all NBA ballots. But with Steph, while he understands his numbers individually might suffer, he understands also that to maximize a winning formula within a team concept, there's a level of sacrifice that must be carried out by the best player to create balance within the rest of the team. So Steve introduced this idea. Steph embraced this idea. He bought in early on, and essentially it helped create a balance within the team from year one up until last season, of course. And this also, right, allowed Andre Iguodala to come off the bench, because that was a big request early on. But having Steph buy in and having things shake up and shake out, if Steph had questioned Steve and rejected or objected to his initial proposal of the motion offense in terms of what it demands of Steph. Steph had just come off a season where he averaged 24 and 9. So, of course, as a young budding star, you want to improve your stats. You want to improve your standing within the league. And even though Steph's stats went down from 24 points to 23.8 and from, I think, 8.5 assists to 7.7, his efficiency went up, and his MVP considerations resulted in winning the award. So you see how the sacrifice yields these positive results, not only for the individual superstar, but also for the team altogether, because they won the championship that year as well, right? And so you see on a year-to-year basis, great point, Aaron, from 51 wins to 67 wins, number one in the league in net rating, number one seed, right? True dominance. And so even though Steph decided to sacrifice his own numbers and his own shine, it actually resulted in more shine for him and more success for the team. And so introducing this entire system and building it around Steph himself, this system would not necessarily be functional without Steph. In a vacuum, you need a guy like Steph to be able to play on and off the ball, be a threat with the ball in his hands and without, right? And command the attention of the defense on a consistent possession-to-possession basis. So ultimately, they were able to tweak it and fine-tune it over the years to based on each season and how the league has also adjusted to what the Warriors do and how Steph has evolved his own game. But ultimately, the idea remains the same, which is Steph Curry is going to sacrifice. He's going to buy in to Steve Kerr's motion offense, his balanced philosophy in terms of playing on and off the ball as the superstar, and in turn it results in greater success overall as the team. And so that there has to be a level of communication between the two, constant talking about what things we have to change, what things we have to remove or add to optimize the roster or to optimize the team's chances to win, but also a level of humility to not put your ego at the front and immediately reject an idea or object to a concept that's introduced. Right, you have to be able to be open and conversational from that standpoint as well, and be able to put your own agendas and your own interests to the side for the betterment of the team and for the betterment of the group. So that's kind of a recap of his strengths overall. Do you guys want to add anything to that overall with his strengths? I might
Um,
have missed.
go ahead.
Um, yeah, that was well put together. To give you more context on it, an individual, because I had this conversation with him, an individual who really put Steve Kerr onto Stephen Curry before Stephen Curry got the job, and is Steve Nash. Um, Steve Nash at one particular juncture was always raving, was one of the early guys who would always rave about Stephen Curry because he reminded him so much of him, but the play of him, but he was like a much better version. So we had a conversation with Steve Kerr one day when Steve Kerr was going to coach with the New York Knicks, and Steve Kerr was about to get that job. At the time, I believe Steve Nash lived in New York, and Steve's like, "Dog, like I get it, but aren't the Warriors calling you? Like, weren't they pretty serious?" But he's like, "Yeah, well, the Mecca's the Mecca." But Steve Nash, the way he broke down, he said, at the end of the day, um, New York is a huge market. It's a great market, but you have a generational player over there in Stephen Curry, which you could attach yourself to. And every great player from Red Auerbach, every great player was attached to a great coach. It's not just from a standpoint of just like it is. Even if when you say Michael Jordan, it's synonymous with Kobe and Shaq. It's
Phil
synonymous with
Jackson.
Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. You understand what I'm saying? When you talk about Greg Popovich, it's synonymous with Tony Parker and Tim Duncan. You understand what I'm saying? And Steve Nash was like, Steve, you played in those systems. You played with great coaches. You gotta have a great player. And yeah, the Warriors did fell short in the playoffs, but that player is about to take over the league, and his name is Stephen Curry. So Steve went home, worked, put some things together, made his infamous binder, took that binder and brought it to Lakeup and Bob Myers, and they were blown away because he came there with an actual plan. It wasn't about him just coaching. He came there with an actual plan, and that's what actually got him his job. So that's why he has an affinity for Steph. You know, he messed up a couple times with the KD situation and thinking and coming out loud and saying KD is like the best player in the world, blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, like we all know, Steve Kerr is a good coach. He's a solid coach. Pre the Warriors, he didn't have no experience. He didn't coach his son. He didn't coach no AAU teams. He didn't coach no high school teams. He never coached no college teams. He never sit on the staff of his mentor, Lute Olson. He's never sat on the staff of his mentor, Greg Popovich. He was a GM previously, and he worked on TV as a color analyst. Outside of that, he never coached. But what he did have is he's been around greatness. And Bob Myers and Lakeup believed in that. And Steve Nash convinced him to believe in Steph Curry. And thus, the motion offense was born. So it's a
Wait,
little.
before you go, Sha, I want to ask you really quick.
Melo either.
Can you speak on the origin, the genesis, the inception of the motion offense and kind of what went into
Yeah,
that?
well, everybody always brings up the thing of what Tex Winters, but people assign it to Phil Jackson. Obviously, he's the head coach, but Tex Winters is the individual who invented the the whole triangle
Triangle.
offense. But with the triangle offense, Steve Kerr is a guy who really studies the game, and Steve Kerr is a person who takes influence. So he's been around like the Paxson, the Hodges, the Steve Nashes, the Mike D'Antonis. So he's a person that he takes a little bit of everybody. There's a word in catering. It's almost called like a smorgasbord, and it's what a smorgasbord is like, when you see the cheeses, the meats, and the you may have a little bit of snacks, maybe some chicken nuggets on the side, some wings, and it's a bunch of different flavors on a board. And that's how Steve Nash envisioned his coaching style, because he played for Greg Popovich, he played for Phil Jackson, so and he's played for, which the majority of the offense is a guy by the name of Lute Olson in college at Arizona, and he instituted the read and react, take what the defense gives you. So he put all those in a smorgasbord, but you still never had the motion and the movement of it. So what he did was he went and he said in college, one of the teams that always gave Arizona trouble and gave everybody trouble was John Thompson, and John Thompson was at Georgetown. And Georgetown, what they institute was an offense called the Princeton offense, which it's continuous ball movement and continuous dribble penetration, continuous cutting, continuous the point guard, the person who's supposed to score, doesn't get the ball first; he gets the ball last, and that's where the motion offense came from. So it's basically like Steve Kerr is P. Diddy, and he took a sample and he put a bunch of drums together and he remixed it. So it's a remix and a hybrid of the motion offense mixed with the Princeton offense, mixed with the triangle offense, mixed with read and react, and now you have the Golden State Warriors offense. So with that being said, Steve Kerr noticed that in Davidson, I believe the guys, the point guard's name that's Steph played with was Jason Richards. So Richards always was with the ball and he was the point guard. Steph was off the ball and he was running around and cutting and doing all those things. So Steve Kerr said, "What if I brought structure to it? That's not just the thing." And when Davidson, it was a good offense, but the problem is everybody would hone in to Steph Curry. But what if I added the triangle offense where there was making from everybody, not just the point guard? So he did that, and that's where you get the whole Steve Kerr motion offense that's called today. But it's really a smorgasbord of the Princeton offense, which was run at Georgetown. That's why people always say Otto was so perfect. The reason why Otto was so perfect is because everybody who's ever worked in Golden State, right, played in the offense that Steve Kerr is running. Why was Iggy so impactful to the Warriors, guys? Take a wild guess. What college did Iggy go to?
Arizona.
Arizona is where Steve Kerr went, and that's the inception of the read and react offense. Otto Porter. Where did Otto Porter go?
Georgetown.
Georgetown. And Georgetown's the ball movement, the Princeton offense, the cutting, the continuous movement, and whatnot. And then you have Stephen Curry. What did he play majority in college? He was on the ball definitely when it was in the tournament, and he had to go high pick and roll, and he had to do different things. But majority of the time, he was off the ball. So he took basically all his players and everything that he had and instituted things that everybody always knew, and he went to that. Virginia as well. Virginia ran a motion offense. That's why he has an affinity with a guy like Ty Jerome. Ty Jerome went to Virginia. You understand what I'm saying? And they ran a similar offense. So guys work out with when they have experience within the system. So that's just basically the nut of this. It's all in a nutshell. Dre. But there you
100%.
go.
I appreciate it.
And
Yeah, you're gonna add something, Sun God, right? About strength.
yeah. So one thing that I think that Steve Kerr is really one of his strengths is actually defensive game planning. And I think we've seen that throughout the years. Like the first example, obviously, is you know, outside of even the adjustment to start Iguodala, um, Steve Kerr and the Warriors were actually one of the, at least in my experience, they were one of the first teams to institute the sort of tag and switch, right? Especially when LeBron James was trying to get switches on Steph Curry. That's when you really saw sort of innovation on defense, where Steph Curry would switch out, he would tag LeBron James, basically just don't concede the switch and just tag him literally to make sure that he can't just drive by and then wait for your defender to recover, and then Steph Curry would recover to his man. Um, so that's one example. Obviously, you saw last year with
pre-switching too, right?
yes, pre-switching as well. And then even this King series last year, right? Ricky G brought it up exactly right. Is we switched up our game plan to basically not allow Fox and Malik Monk to get downhill, and we started going under screens and fighting under screens, and that really neutralized them. Towards the latter half of the series, and going back to 2022, right? There was also now part right, and the caveat to this is obviously it's a collective effort, right? Players and coaches to come up with it, but the putting Draymond on Jaylen Brown and putting obviously Wiggins on Tatum, and exploiting their one-handedness. That's another great example of that. And then obviously in the LeBron James series, sort of having that, and they applied that sort of principle of he kind of stole that from the Spurs, right? And it's goes with what Shadow says. All the great coaches steal. You steal from somebody, but going with the game plan of having LeBron James be a scorer and a scorer only, and not a distributor, right? So I think defensive game planning is. I think that's one of Steve Kerr's best strengths, and we've seen a variety of defenses over the years, and we've basically been in at least the top 10 outside of I think 3 years, right? Last year, 2021, and I believe 2019. 2019.
In terms of defense,
Outside of the top 10 in
it was
defensive.
funny. 2021, we were actually top 5. I think we were number 5, but I think you're
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Last year,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
2020 you're speaking of.
2020,
Yes, thank you.
and then last year, right? And then you said 2019, right? We were like 11th or something, right?
Yeah, and I think
Oh wait, that was
2017 too.
Was that 2018 actually? 2018 we were 11th, maybe.
Sorry, 28. I think so. 2018, we were 11th, and I think 2019 we were like 14th.
Okay.
And then we were like 29th, 28th, in 2020.
Although
Yeah.
Sun God, I will say that some of those matchup specific defensive adjustments that you referred to last year were made by Ron Adams and previously by Mike Brown. So I'm not going to give Steve all the credit for that. Steve Kerr.
Like I will say that, right, AK? But here's the thing, right? Like if we're gonna give him shit for when he gets it wrong, I'm gonna also have to give him credit for when, he does get it right. Whether it's,
No, I know that, but some of
listening to
the examples you referred
But-
to, for example, the point of attack switches on Fox were literally made by Ron Adams. So, like he was calling that shit out on the
yeah,
center.
and I mean Steve Kerr, Ron Adams has been the defensive coordinator since Steve Kerr got here. So like pretty much all of the defensive, like strengths that we've had, I would attribute almost all of them to Ron Adams, right? Besides like Mark Jackson building that sort of, the competing foundation, right? Competing on defense foundation. Outside of that, tactically, I think, it has Ron Adams's, fingerprints all over the defense.
Yeah, Mike Brown as well.
Yes, Mike Brown.
Mike Brown as well, because in essence, the defensive schemes they run are based off of Draymond's ability. Draymond Green is literally they all were in cahoots to make that defense. That's why everyone wonders why Steph Curry is so important on offense, because the whole entire encompassment of the offense was centered around Steph, and the whole encompassment of the defense was centered around Draymond Green. So that's why you have issues when Steph misses games and when Draymond's missed games. The shit don't work the same because it's centered around both of those guys on either end. Just a little bit to add to it.
100%. Are there any other strengths you guys think I missed in the chat or on stage?
I would say the culture. I've never really called Steve Kerr like an elite, excellent coach. But what I will do is he's an excellent game manager, people manager. His interpersonal skills. He gets the right people in position, like the Mike Browns, quote unquote, the Alvin Gentry's, which was huge in that 2015 championship. Alvin Gentry. It's not said enough. Like if you watch the first season, the ATOs were the clipboard was never in Steve Kerr's hand. It's funny when you get that scene where he's breaking the clipboard and he's mad, but it's like a prop because he never used the shit. It was all Alvin Gentry who was using it. Again, I have people who were even pre-Wiggins. I had a bunch of people who were either on the staff in the scouting department, played for the team and whatnot, and so I got a lot of insight. And also, Steve Nash, one of my OGs, is Steve Nash's best friend, so he would tell me a lot of stuff. But Steve Kerr, I would not take nothing away. He was speaking of that. Remember in February of there was a time we had a whole debate on Steve Kerr. Like remember the list came out, top 15 coaches. Steve Kerr was actually hurt that he didn't make that list. Very similar to Clay Thompson and top 75. That's another little tidbit for the chat and you guys as well. Steve Kerr was like he lost sleep over that shit.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
had no idea. Damn.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, I think the collaboration aspect, exactly as you said, Shadow. I think that's
Yeah,
also great.
I think probably he's the best ever to do that. Like compile a staff and
Yep.
take everybody's in because you know what? Another thing what people don't realize, majority of white coaches get fired, right? Is when it's time for the exit meetings. No other coaches are going to bat for them. Why is that? Because head coaches have an ego issue and they don't give equal input to guys like Ron Adams, Mike Brown, Alvin Gentry. They don't care if they're former coaches or coaches. They have a complex because they feel that a former coach who became an assistant coach is always out and gunning for their job. Steve Kerr is very comfortable in the skin and he allows that input from other guys. Like we've seen Nick Huron. Now Nick is, I believe, Phoenix Mercury executive now. But at the time, this guy was just a video guy, and he made a suggestion to Ron Adams, and Ron Adams passed it down to Steve Kerr, and they all sat together, and that was the adjustment that they made with Iggy coming in and starting. And that's not like, and Steve Kerr gave him credit. It's not an average individual, like an average coach would come out and take, oh, that was a great adjustment. Yep. That was something that we came out. Also, I talked to the staff, but that was something that I saw and I put it in. And usually 9 out of 10 times it's not the head coach. And then the executives would talk to the assistants and everybody else and said, "Oh, that guy's an asshole. That guy's this, that." Whereas Steve Kerr, everybody goes to bat for him because from interpersonal skills component, he always makes guys feel comfortable. One, two, when guys don't want to take coaching jobs, Steve Kerr would rather push them out the door, and a lot of people ain't doing that. You know what I'm saying? Like another one, Kenny Atkinson. Was locked in for the Charlotte job, and Steve Kerr's like, "Get the hell out of my face, take the job or whatever, whatever." Kenny Atkinson actually had to beg back to come back because Steve Kerr said, "Nope, take your head coaching job. You're a head coach in this league. You deserve it." But Kenny Atkinson, he didn't like the structure of what was going on over there, and it didn't have the same cachet that Steve Kerr had, and with the family environment. The players are respectful. Everybody's having fun, laughing, and he built a culture that's unlike any other we've seen in probably sports. So Steve Kerr gets kudos for that. Again, he may not be the greatest X and O's coach on the planet, but when it comes to managing expectations, managing and putting things and executing things, he's masterful at that. That man is not even a CEO. He's a chairman. He's amazing at that. So I will always give him his flowers for that. Of course.
And right, Jama went from the head of player development to the front of the bench in charge of defense. You saw that with you already mentioned Alvin Gentry, right? Alvin Gentry was in full control of the offense, and Alvin Gentry was, he left for a head coaching job afterwards, right? When no teams were touching him after his Phoenix stint. You saw that with it didn't work out well, but Luke Walton as well, right? Luke Walton got 2 head coaching jobs after leaving. Mike Brown now, and then to a lesser extent, Willie Green. A lot of people don't know Willie Green was on the Warriors coaching. Well, he was on the Warriors coaching staff prior to going to Phoenix, and he was more of in like the Shadow probably knows more, but he was in more of like a player, player development. He worked with Draymond a lot pregame, and I'm pretty sure, Shadow, I could be wrong, right? But I'm pretty sure he got his start. We were like maybe the second team after he retired.
Yep,
That he got
yep,
a
yep,
job
yep.
with.
Right away.
Yeah. So Steve Kerr, yeah, his empowerment is, you know, uh, for better or for worse, it gets his staff. They do get offered head coaching jobs, and he's kind of like Popovich in that sense of right now, in terms of you want a head coaching job, you go to Golden State, you put in a few years, maybe win some chips, and you get a head coaching job like we saw with Kenny Atkinson. And I think that's a huge strength of Steve Kerr.
100%, 100%. You think we covered everything, right? For the most part, with strengths.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right. So then let's move on to weaknesses. So the
Oh
first
boy,
weakness, yeah. So this is
we're going to say we're haters.
the meat and potatoes of kind of this breakdown, where he needs to get better at, and I think going into next season, some of these things he's admitted, some of these things, as fans we've kind of observed over the years and feel the need to, voice our concern. So the first of which being offensive system limitations, right? So the motion offense, the rigid, the rigid and predictable nature it may have at times, right? The very fact that there's certain sets and play calls that you run, setting up the offense itself, right? Understanding positions and how to kind of set up the breakdowns that the Warriors are trying to exploit within the defense, things like that. And one of those examples is like the split action, right? Which I'll kind of get to, but the motion offense at times can be run into the ground. It can bog down the flow and the up and down nature that we like to play, and so it takes away, when we run it a little bit too much, takes away from the fast and joyful nature we like to play with, right? Because of course we're a basketball team. We're going to run sets. We're going to have our actions, the bread and butter stuff that we like to run. But there needs to also be a level of flow, a degree of, um, other players just kind of mixing it up a bit, right? We can't just run the same thing over and over again until defenses kind of figure it out and they're able to, telegraph passes and it becomes easier for the defense to kind of figure out how to stop it, right? Whether they overplay the shooter coming off his screens, or funnel the ball to the corner for a less equipped shooter to take the shot. Like there's definitely a degree of predictability involved in the motion offense. We've seen throughout the seasons where there's games we just run it way too much, and or even in the playoffs, and we have to go away from it, right? Against the Rockets, back in those late 2010 years, 2018, 2019, we just weren't able to run the motion. We just couldn't, because they were switching all of the actions. They were
You know
putting
what's funny, Dre, about the motion stuff?
yeah,
If Looney and Draymond were a threat, the shit would be unguardable.
100%, and that's also true as well as the personnel. The limitations of the personnel also are a reason why the motion just isn't as optimized and has its limitations. You're right, because if they were outside threats, if they could shoot on the perimeter, whether in the corner or top of the key, pick and pop situations, then we probably wouldn't be talking about it being
Because if you think
overran.
about it, right? Like if Draymond is the trigger man, right? And if you have Steph and Clay running around and all of this stuff, right? And Draymond shoots the ball, and they're backing up off of him and all of that. Once they start to back up off of him, the defense then has to press up on him. You know what I'm saying? If he makes like two, three shots or whatever, then the defense is there and they have to start to guard him now. You know what I'm saying? But the problem is that He's not being guarded, and like he's not really a threat to even drive to the rim or even make a shot. So that's where it gets sticky. That's where it gets really really dicey, and it's not like it wouldn't work, but those guys are just not, they're just not threats. You know what I'm saying? Like when KD was running that shit, bro, it was unstoppable. It was absolutely unstoppable when KD was in the offense. But there was still limitations to it, and the limitation was Draymond. You know what I'm saying? Like we always talk about how we have to we have to cover for Draymond on offense, and that is 100% true. I mean, when when Draymond in 16, I think that was his peak in the offense, and when he was shooting like damn near 40% from three and all of that, they were unguardable. The minute he started to have like the issues offensively is when it fell off of a cliff. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't as effective in spots. If you look at every instance through the era, 15, 16, 17, anytime it has failed, it's failed because of Draymond's inability to do some things, right? Like if you think about that OKC series, OKC locked that up because Kevin Durant locked up Draymond, right? That's kind of what happened. You know what I'm saying? And then they had to go Steph ball screen, Steph ball screen, Steph ball screen. I'm not saying that Draymond doesn't provide other things, he does, right? But if we're just looking in a vacuum in terms of why it fails, uh, that's the main reason why, right? So
That's very
Draymond is
true.
super important, but if he's gonna have the ball in his hands, and if he's gonna be one dimensional, then all the defense has to do is just lean the other direction and just lean on his playmaking and force him to do certain things. And if they always know he's going to try to make a play, try to pass the ball, then there's no point to it. And when he was a threat to do other things, I shit you not, he tracked as a top 10 player. Go look at the stats. So he's probably the main problem in that dynamic. It's not that it doesn't work, and I feel like people have this impression about the offense that it never works. This and scrap it, this and that, right? Like it doesn't work because of Draymond, and that is a big deal. So what I'm excited about this season is watching the dynamic between CP3, Steph, Draymond, and what's that's going to look like. Because if we have an area for concern, it's going to be what happens to Draymond when CP has the ball. So ultimately, I think what's going to happen is that CP and Draymond, they might not be able to be on the court at the same time. You know what I'm saying? If we were just to project forward,
100%. No,
if
that's
Steph is
definitely
on the court, like that might be a problem. Because then, what happens with Draymond then? Because Draymond ultimately needs to have the ball, so it might
no.
become an issue.
You're exactly right. No, 100%. And I do believe the motion offense does more good than bad. There are times that teams will overplay the shot, and I feel like you're right. Like after 2016, it became like Steph and Clay's shot quality really plummeted. Like the shots they were taking, teams were just playing them for more and more often. And they're just such great shooters that they can overcome that, right? Like they're just tough shot makers. They're gonna shoot contested, open, off the move, off the catch, 28, 30 feet out, hand in their face. Like it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it is true that the degree of difficulty on those shots was much higher post 2016 because you are right. If Draymond and particularly at the center spot, Kevon Looney or Andrew Bogut, that many years ago, were able to punish teams, offensively more so as from a spacing standpoint, on the perimeter, but even as a lob threat, then it would expand, right, the court, and it would provide Steph, Clay, and even during the KD years, better shot quality, right? And so the limitations, you're right, are a result of the limitations of the personnel.
This is
And
where I don't think KD gets enough credit, because KD came in and he fit right into it, right? Like
Right. Right.
it was like a seamless transition, and that transition was there because of how great he is coming off of the ball. You know what I'm saying? Now, I am optimistic that CP is going to figure it out, but this is why I think they'll just ultimately figure. Why they'll just ultimately kind of figure out playing with each other because CP, he's ball dominant. Steph and Clay aren't so ball dominant, but the dynamic that I worry about is the Draymond dynamic. Like, do we use him as a screener more, or what do we do with him exactly now? You know?
Um, Again, I'm just gonna tap in quickly for the insight. Um, a dynamic that I brought up to everybody is that CP3 is gonna immensely help Steph Curry because Steph Curry's never had somebody really an actual true point guard set the table for him in his entire career, so he's gonna benefit. But if you really think about it, who CP3 helps the most are power forwards. If you think about all the power forwards that played alongside from David West to Blake Griffin, those guys benefit the most. And I believe that we're about to see the best offensive Draymond we've ever seen because of CP3. He's going to give them the ball in the right spaces. I believe they're going to go in and tweak certain things. Everybody always, well, everybody. I'm always been a pusher and a proponent of like if Draymond Green doesn't have the ball, what the fuck is he going to do on offense? Now there's something for him to do. Draymond Green, I would say, is a great playmaker. Elite, I don't know about. A great playmaker. But where he is elite is a second trigger man. Anytime you watch this split action where the ball comes in, enters, and then Draymond passes it to the shooter, that's money because his timing on that is elite. Now, if you talk about the downhill stuff, the floppies, the elbows, the head taps, Draymond Green is not gonna have the ball no more. Steph's gonna be rotating. Is definitely Clay is gonna be the shooter, but Draymond's gonna be what's called the secondary playmaker. And as a secondary playmaker, I don't know anybody who's ever done it better than Draymond. As a initial playmaker, I don't think he's in that categories of the Jokers, the CP3s, the Jason Kidds, the John Stocktons. But as a secondary playmaker slash point forward, he's in the levels of the Lamar Odoms and the Ben Simmons and those type of guys. And I think that Draymond helps that. Another thing I want to add on to Steve Kerr's weakness is this number one thing in my personal book, 2 words. Actually, it's 3 words. Role player Rodney, brother. His affinity for guys like Chioza, Clark, Ty Jerome, guys who played the same exact role as him, is killing the Golden State Warriors. It killed him last year. It killed him in 2021. And Chioza, Wanamaker, those guys were playing way too many minutes at an NBA level. This is why we suffered as a team. You always hear the old adage, a team is only as strong as its weakest link, and we had too many fucking weak links, brother. It wasn't even a link, bro. It was a fucking hula hoop. Shit was terrible, bro. So with that being said, I think he puts way too much trust on role player Rodney's, and if I was to say that's his worst thing about him, like you have guys like Kelly Oubre running split action, you have um Wanamaker and all these Ian Clark and the cheeseheads, the Chiozas, and like you're sick to your stomach. You're like, why the fuck is this happening? But this is just Steve Kerr, and I think his ability to make adjustments too as well. They're pretty bad. He's instead of being proactive, he's a reactive type of person. And I think that in the Lakers series, if he made some earlier adjustments, I think we don't lose 2 of those games, which in reality means we win the series. So that's all I had to add.
No, I love all those points. Absolutely, Shadow.
And
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, just to quickly add on, I think just to go along exactly with Shadow's point, not only role player Rodney's, but I think vets as well. Pretty much the exact same scenario with the vets. He's very favorable to vets, and yeah, it goes along with also the last point, right, which leads to failure of developing younger players.
Yeah, at this point, I don't think he's capable of doing that. It's just, it is what it is. He develops guys by accident. Like Jordan Poole got developed because Klay Thompson couldn't play. We talk about, oh, Jordan Poole as a starter. What? Well, he started because fucking Klay Thompson couldn't play. So he his first year when he was terrible, he got drafted to the team because they panicked, and that was the closest person in the draft that they felt that they could have drafted that replaced Klay Thompson. Um, Mike D'Antoni was actually a huge in the Jordan Poole, but Jordan Poole was like number 4 on their board. But based off of necessity, when Clay goes down right before the draft, he shot up right to number 1, and it's serendipity, luck, chance, and circumstance. So
The same way
there,
with Wiggins and Kaminga, right? Like the only
yeah,
reason Kaminga looked as good as he did for those
it's
stretches
because
last.
Wiggins was missing.
Exactly.
It's because
Exactly.
Wiggins was missing. So, and also another time when we saw him,
Draymond, David Lee,
when
right?
Draymond was missing. So
Yeah.
Steve Kerr is not capable. Like people think like I'm on. I actually like Steve Kerr because I don't believe that you have to sit there and these guys are grown players. They're highly elite, and I'm more leaning towards coaches should direct players. They shouldn't sit. They should coach them up, but they shouldn't coach them down. And when I mean coach them down is when you call every set, every play. You just got to be free out there, and the freer they are, and the less structure you give them, it's more like in acting when they give you like a generalization of a scene and they say knock it out. I don't think they're sitting there giving Denzel Washington lines. They're saying, okay, this is the scenario, this is it is. There's the script. Do whatever the hell you want to. And then those are the groundbreaking scenes. Those are the scenes that win Oscars. Why? Because you have the elite of the elite of the elite. They just need direction. They don't need to be told what to do or how to do it. Whereas coaches, they tell you got to tell them what to do, how to do it, and you're supposed to do that to rookies, younger players. But when vets like with Draymond, Steph, Clay, based on their feel, because they're gonna know better than the coach, they should be able to call the plays, call the sets. Say, let's go high ball screen. Let's put this guy in the blender. This guy's a bum. Go at him. You understand what I'm saying? And I think Steve Kerr's got to take a step back from like trying to be so hands on and everything, and just be more free flowing, like how he was not by choice, because he didn't really know how to coach, so he was less hands on. And as you can see, 2015, 2016 look fucking masterful to me. What do you guys say?
100%. No, you're exactly right. And that's kind of speaks to the motion offense. Like Arco makes a good point, right? The limitations that we see within the motion offense is partly because of the limitations of the personnel, right? Of the players like Draymond, of Loon as a scorer, right? Guys that can't really space vertically or horizontally as shooters on the perimeter. But also there are times where, understanding that you're given this personnel, we are just hyperactively running these concepts and this style of play into the ground. So there needs to be a greater balance, and that's kind of what Jim, if he were here, he would be kind of uh, you know advocating for, is a greater balance between the motion and other styles of play. Right? KD even said this himself. KD talked about how you need to mix in individual play within the concepts and the schemes that we run, right? So off the dribble stuff, isolations, pick and rolls, those are exactly out of Katie's own mouth. So yeah, we need a little bit more of a balance of other avenues to score the ball and put our guys in the position to score offensively. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a balance to be struck, and Steve has kind of found it here or there in playoff series when we absolutely need to go to it the most, whether it be against the Rockets or the Thunder or the Cavs. Um, there have been moments, even against the Celtics, right? There have been moments where we've seen a greater degree of isolation play, of shot creation, pick and rolls, because of necessity. But I do think, just in general, just having a greater uh, get greater overall balance and approach to the offensive schemes would be much more beneficial down the line. So we can put ourselves in a much more advantageous position to be able to kind of adjust and adapt on a whim. But yeah, I think there are limitations to it ultimately, because if teams understand that your approach is to move the ball and players are supposed to move, then they're going to play you for the pass, and it becomes more predictable and more expected that you're able to kind of overplay the passing lanes or close out on shooters, because you know that that's what you're hunting for. You're hunting for open shots on the perimeter. So there's definitely a balance to be struck, but we've seen us kind of go to the motion offense at times where, a game in particular that sticks out to me was against the Timberwolves earlier this year, where we had damn near half a quarter where we were scoreless because we just ran it into the ground. So there's definitely times where we need to mix it up and go to different options, different looks that can get us, still high quality offense. So I think Chris Paul coming in and having him communicate with Steve is going to be extremely beneficial to kind of balancing out how we approach this offensively. I also said that the motion offense doesn't always fit the personnel, right? Doesn't always fit the personnel, doesn't always fit the other players' skill sets. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? That's one of the biggest separators between a coach like Steve Kerr and then a guy like Eric Spoelstra, who on a year-to-year basis is going to adjust the system to the players he's provided, whereas Steve is going to try to fit the players within the system he has implemented. And I think that is the dichotomy where there's times where you see a James Wiseman, where you see a Kelly Oubre, where you see, even to a lesser extent, a Jonathan Kuminga, right? Running more pick and roll, playing to their strengths. Steve at times doesn't necessarily play to the strengths of his players' skill sets. And so in turn, they look less effective. They don't play to their potential. They find it very difficult to fit in to the team and find consistent minutes and rotation, a rotation spot, because he just doesn't feel that they're able to thrive and excel in the offense because they haven't shown to, fit into the motion concepts. And so Steve needs to do a better job. And he probably, I don't expect him to as much, but there does need to be a little bit more of a balance, right? Because he's going to stick to the motion offense. He's going to stick to his own philosophies and his own approach. But there needs to be a little bit of adaptability, um, a little bit of a balance into playing into your players' skill sets overall, right? You cannot not run pick and roll for Jonathan Kuminga when that's what he's best at, right? With James Wiseman, we saw him running split actions, making decisions out of the post, putting him in these compromising positions that he's just not equipped to excel at, positions that Kevin Durant was in a year earlier, the same exact spots. And so you need to understand the skill set, the abilities, the capabilities of the players that you are presented with, and then adjust your system and tweak it so that it fits what they do best, as opposed to fitting the players into your own system and then having an imbalance or uh, struggles and a learning curve that at times has worked out in our favor, but also at times has led to the stunted growth of our younger players, right? And so even veteran players like a Kelly Oubre, right? So there's times where we need to be, we need Steve to be a little bit more open and liberal with how he kind of approaches the offense, as opposed to being rigid and stubborn with the motion ideas. Um, and so, like I said, like the system effectiveness in turn is maximized with the core running it, and that's a big deal, right? It basically, in other words, that system that Steve Kerr runs isn't scalable because it's dependent on the personnel he's provided with. So if you don't have Steph Curry as the primary threat on and off the ball, moving off of screens and in constant motion, if you don't have Klay Thompson as your spacer, as we saw in 2021, right? Spacing the floor, being a high level, all time great threat at the 3-point line, a guy that can put up 18 to 20 points a night. And then if you don't have if you don't have Draymond Green, a decision maker downhill, connective passer, defensive anchor, a guy that can make the right reads, screen at an elite level, you know, make the proper decisions on offense, understanding how to take advantage of the advantages that are created. All of these things, the skill set of the core is really what makes this offense work and the system thrive. And so when you don't have one or two or even all three of these players available, then the system falls apart. We saw this in 2021 without Clay. We saw this in 2022. It's not 2022 without Draymond to an extent, right? And we've seen this in 2020 without Steph, right? And in 2022, I would say that we saw more Steph on the ball, right? We kind of moved away from the system because we weren't able to sustain it. Not having a player like Draymond, we had to lean offense, and we had to put Steph on the ball more as a playmaker and as a scorer. So even though we fared, comfortably well without Draymond in 2022, we still couldn't run the motion offense the way we traditionally do because Draymond's chemistry with Steph, his high-level screening ability, the ability to make those reads as a connector, that didn't exist. And so that's a major stipulation with running an offense like this, is that you need specific personnel that are able to fit within the concept you're trying to run as role players, but also as stars, right? So it's not necessarily as portable as you think, right? There's a lot of stars in the NBA that aren't able to adopt and adapt to the motion offense. There's a lot of role players in the NBA that don't fit what's demanded of them within the motion offense. So there's definitely limitations to it, and we've seen it throughout the years of players that just simply are are misfits for what trying to win within within the confines of what the motion offense demands. And then, like I said, because the effectiveness is maximized with the core, and it can only truly be optimized in a championship context with them all being available. There's also a degree of the playbook being outdated, right? Because teams have seen the same looks, they've seen the same sets and plays ran throughout this decade, right? Throughout the last 7, 8, 9 years during this run, teams have familiarized themselves with the sets and the play calls the Warriors like to run in terms of tendencies, in terms of just overall, like one of them being the split action, right? Overall, just situational ATOs, down by 3, right? The Lakers read that play perfectly for Klay Thompson in the corner at the end of game 4, right? We're down by 3 and we run the hammer play. And so it's stuff like that where we need a little bit more of an update to the playbook. We need to be a little bit more creative with how we run our offense. The split action is definitely a pillar of the ideas and the motion concept of having multiple options and counters out of the post, right? Making a play to either Steph coming off the curl or finding a cutter, a slipping screener to the basket, or even taking the shot in the post itself, right? You have a bunch of different outcomes that you can go to, but teams have read the play over the years. They've been able to kind of cut off some of those counters through switching. So teams have become more familiar with the offense that we like to run, the play calls, and I think there's again limitations, and there's something that we can do. There's definitely something we can do to kind of correct that, which is be more creative, be more innovative with how we approach next season in terms of the play call, especially with a diverse skill set that we have. Adding Chris Paul, Dario Saric being in the mix as a free agent, and then you have Jonathan Kuminga and his increased minutes. So we definitely have a lot, guys that can kind of fit some of what we like to do, but also guys that have strengths of their own. Chris Paul being a pick and roll ball handler, Jonathan Kuminga being a pick and roll man, Dario Saric being a guy that can play out of the post and try to score on mismatches, right? We have to be able to exploit mismatches. That's one thing I actually missed earlier is I don't feel like the motion offense exploits mismatches as often as it should, right? There are bad off-ball defenders, but there's times where there's players who are just poor on the ball, and we're kind of bailing them out. We're letting them off the hook by not going at them. So we need to do a better job, a more conscious effort in attacking poor defenders and exploiting those mismatches. Because there definitely are a bunch of mismatches that are presented throughout the course of a game. So you don't want to let those guys and those situations off the hook. And then the last weakness I mentioned on this slide was he failed to develop young players. And that's something that I mentioned earlier is he understanding that there's different skill sets you have to blend and mix in within the offense, within the team. And he just hadn't been able to do it at a high level being the coach for the last 2-3 seasons, right? Just didn't give Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga enough time to play, to develop, to learn through their mistakes. And that cost them in the playoffs because we ended up running a 3-guard lineup off the bench, and we weren't fully equipped to run these younger players over the course of the season and prepare them in a championship context. So Steve has really struggled with this throughout the years. Obviously, with the trade of James Wiseman, right? We no longer could have him on the team because he didn't fit what we're trying to do. And Steve didn't do a good job of playing to his strengths and developing him. So we had to move off of him. Obviously, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody last season, we saw how their minutes were fluctuated throughout. They weren't necessarily optimized and put in position to succeed as well. So come playoff time, right, while Moody did play well, he also didn't see much time throughout the season. So I would attribute that more to Moses Moody playing out of his mind and playing above his expected level, as opposed to Steve Kerr putting him in the right positions all season long and having that be the result. And obviously with Kuminga, he didn't even see any consistent degree of playing time at all during the playoffs. So you just got to look at these things and understand that next season, this is a big year for Steve in terms of developing and putting these guys in the right spots so they can be equipped come playoff time to play consistent rotation minutes. All right. I have one more slide for weaknesses, and then we'll move on to expectations. And if you guys want to add anything, you can add something as well at the end. So the last thing I mentioned was his stubbornness, and this is something we saw a lot of in 2022, but we still won the championship, right? It did feel like last season this was the case even more so. And there have been times where Steve has really towed the line of being stubborn as a coach and not changing his rotations and not adjusting how he coaches overall. And so there have been times where we've gotten away with it and it's worked out, but there have also been times like the 2016 finals or even 2021, 2023, right? There have been years where we could point to where he just didn't do an adequate job of changing his rotations during a playoff series, right? So you can put yourself in a favorable position against certain matchups. And this is one thing that Jim likes to really harp on, which is fully accurate. He doesn't do a great job maximizing the impact of a star player. When we talk about with Steph, right? And while he has done an incredible job of putting Steph on and off the ball, implementing the system, having him buy in. And of course, the strengths outweigh the weaknesses when we talk about maximizing Steph. At the end of the day, Steph, there's times where the ball isn't in his hands enough. And we've seen this. We've complained about this as fans for years, where we need to see more pick and roll. We need to see him isolate against mismatches. We cannot let opposing defenses off the hook when they're not equipped to guard other actions. And sometimes we bail them out by running motion offense, or when Steph's rotations are put in a situation where he's playing with lesser talent or he's playing less minutes overall. And so because of that, he's not necessarily being prioritized, and the role players are instead getting them acclimated, getting them up to speed. And that is a positive thing. I mentioned that as a strength, that Steve favors and identifies with role players. And that's a good thing because you do need role players to win a championship. You need them to deliver and to play well during the playoffs and feel comfortable enough throughout the season for that to happen. But it does feel at times that Steve leans too far into accommodating the role players as opposed to putting Steph in the optimal positions that he needs to be in to either win games in the regular season or even during the playoffs against certain matchups, certain moments you can exploit the defense. It feels like Steve is a little bit late to the party when it comes to making those adjustments. And Steph kind of has to take it upon himself to adapt to what's presented in front of him and kind of change up the game plan, whether it be run more pick and roll if they're down or attack switches when their backs are against the wall. It just feels as if Steve can do a better job of balancing the star player and prioritizing him, but also getting the role players up to speed and having them feel comfortable when the lights shine brightest, right? So there definitely is a balance to be achieved, and I will say I'd rather him prioritize the role players because at the end of the day, we kind of know Steph is going to deliver no matter what situation he is put in, right? We'd rather him because at the end of the day, if Steve is pushing for Steph and prioritizing Steph and playing him over 38 minutes a night and putting the ball in his hands every possession and making him, run pick and roll and isolate and attack mismatches, then the role players won't won't be put in position to deliver come playoff time. And we need them to feel more comfortable because they're less dependable, right? Steph Curry is inherently more dependable than any role player is because he's that great. So you can kind of manipulate and ask him to manipulate his minutes, but also ask him to be more flexible and be more sacrificial in terms of how he approaches, the regular season, whether in terms of rotations, things like that, in favor of the role players, right? And so that's definitely something over time that we've seen where guys like Damian Lee, Chris Chiozza, Brad Wanamaker, and there have been you can go down the list where these guys are getting a lot of minutes, they're getting accommodated, Bielitsa, JaMychal Green, and there have been times where a balance is difficult to find, but there's times also that it's at the cost of Steph Curry, and I think Steve needs to be a little bit more conscious about prioritizing his superstar because at the end of the day, we go as Steph goes. So while I do like the concept of leaning into the role players for stretches and trying to get them to be comfortable and prepared for the playoffs, given the positions they'll be in, it's also important that your star player is also put in the right spots so he can thrive and excel when when his name is called upon too. And then the last thing I said was adjusting his coaching approach overall, just pick and roll frequency. It just feels as if every season we're a bottom 5 team in pick and roll. And obviously that's been something that Jim has asked for many years. And nobody is asking for us to be a top 5 or top 10 pick and roll frequency team. But I do think we can strike a more balanced approach when it comes to, not being a bottom 3 or a bottom 5 pick and roll team. We can, even if we're 18th or 20th or, 16th, something like that. Bottom half pick and roll team, but still enough to where we're getting good production and good quality points per possession out of these situations. I still feel like there's a lot of value in that and being creative, right? We don't have to just run pick and roll. We can run variations of it. We can integrate motion concepts within and different counters that we can go to. So it just feels as if Steve can be more creative and be more effective within the offense that he implements on a year-to-year basis. Any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on his weaknesses? Anything that I might have missed?
One to add to the variety, one big thing that I think has been really missing this year or these past few years is Spain pick and roll. I don't think we run enough of that compared to the rest of the league, as it's a very, very good way to, get your star player a good look.
Or even horns for that matter.
I think we moved away from horns just due to the lack of, or the offensive decline of our front court. But yeah, we could still run more horns, yes. And yeah, the other weakness that I wanted to kind of add, and it's kind of a give or take, at least for me, is the regular season. And I know Jim Park is very adamant about the regular season, but and I don't personally fully agree, but I do think it's worth bringing up that Steve Kerr he's kind of a little too happy or too
Casual.
casual, yeah, about throwing away games and just using the regular season as more of like a chance to implement the vanilla offense, right?
Experimentation. Right.
He
Right,
throws away like 15 games a year, dog. Like, with all
right,
due respect,
yeah.
especially recently.
And there's while I do think there's a little bit of the method behind the madness, I think there is just a little bit too much madness for my taste. And it works when it works, right? Like pretty much the exception of a couple of years, every other year, the philosophy does pay off. But like with the rigidity of the offense, right? It's like sometimes, a lot of times, or sometimes it doesn't work, and you do kind of have to adjust your approach on that. And I do think he's very kind of stubborn about his approach to the regular season.
100%. Shadow, do you want to add anything in terms of weaknesses or anything that I might have missed? I know you spoke on just how he throws games away and stuff, but anything else you think you could add?
Can I add something?
Yeah, of course. Anybody.
I think that despite all the weaknesses we all spoke of, I think we all can agree that even at the very very highest level of basketball, even above the NBA, at this highest talented level of Olympians and FIBA that we see now, the best of the best have still voted that it would still be best for Steve Kerr to be fit as the coach. And I know Greg Popovich recently stated that his reasonings as to why he felt it was a good fit. And I think despite the weaknesses that we do see or feel, the record speaks for itself. The amount of rings on his finger speak for itself. And I'm not saying that we don't see that. I just kind of want to remind it out there that sometimes those weaknesses are a little
Overblown.
too glaring, a little too overblown because
Mm-hmm.
to think that Steve Kerr isn't aware of it. For example, one thing we didn't really touch base on today is that there was a point in time last season where Steve Kerr did publicly call out Clay for his bullshit. You couldn't control some of the shit that Clay was doing, and that has nothing to do with Steve Kerr at all. And Clay was taking away key possessions, stopping the offense, taking dumb shots, of course not being in shape. And to a certain extent, once you establish a culture, there's certain things that you kind of already expect from the players, which is why I believe Jordan Poole's effort was such a big issue, because effort shouldn't be an issue at that level. And I think that's how they took it. Ultimately, why they were comfortable trading him, because you don't want to have to deal with effort being an issue. So there were certain things last year I feel that were out of Steve's control, including the drafting of James Wiseman or the drafting of other players. I think part of what a coach has to do
That's
is
fair. Yep.
is what he's given. And Bob Myers low key doesn't take some of that accountability. He didn't draft the best. He had some bad picks, and also I'm not dismissing any of the weak points that we talked about, because that's where I believe Chris Paul will come in. Just like every great player that has come in, we forget about that famous play, that Jeff Van Gundy play that he said was the best of all time. Steve Kerr was not having it in that play. He was like, what the hell's going on? And at that moment, he realized, I have to let Steph be Steph. So it wasn't necessarily that he just came in with that blueprint, which he did, but ultimately he had to also learn from Steph. And I think with CP3, he's going to unlock something from not only the players, but also to Coach Kerr. And he's going to be like, look,
Yeah.
I got this. You weak on X's and O's? I got this. Don't worry. I'll take care
You
of
make
that.
a really good point, and I appreciate all those points. You're right. Like, I think there is a degree that Steve needs to, just allow the players to kind of take control at times. And I think CP is going to be a big part of that, right? His vocal leadership qualities, just voicing his ideas and how to, optimize either the roster or a particular play call, or maybe switching up an ATO. You make really good points, and I do think that at the end of the day, the strengths do outweigh the weaknesses, and so there's no doubt in my mind that it would be difficult to win a title with these rosters that have been given to him, especially in 2022. Like, now, obviously, the KD years are a different story because you have such great players around you that it just makes your job as a coach that much easier, right? Because you just the level of talent is overwhelming. But I do think in 2015 and 2016, and in 2022, like the deep runs that we made, going 73-9, having a couple championships, in those seasons. Like, of course, you could argue that Luke Walton had his stretch, right? But at the end of the day, it comes down to Steve Kerr and what he was able to do in terms of implementing and having the best player on the team buy in to the motion offense that he put together. And so, yeah, we wouldn't really be here without Steve. I know, it can be annoying and frustrating at times that his his decisions and kind of his coaching practices and approach can be, infuriating, and in terms of he just is very extreme at times, right? He'll play guys too many minutes or not enough minutes. Bad players too many, great players not enough. But
We sometimes mistake that his way for losing isn't as passionate as sometimes the way we take it when we lose. But we got to understand he's probably one of the most competitive people sports has ever seen. He had Michael Jordan punch him in the face. This guy, don't let his smile fool you. Same with Steph. Like, I think just the way he loses, I think he values his losses a lot differently, more as lessons for his players.
Yes.
I mean, but you're right on the point.
And last thing that I like that you said was about the drafting choices were not necessarily his call, his decision. And I know I mentioned earlier as part of his strengths that, like, he doesn't have a huge ego. He is he's a very he's a person who's very ego, like, he doesn't have a big ego, right? He's not going to be overbearing. He has humility, that kind of thing. But there is a degree with a coach where it's like, I'm not going to adjust my system to a rookie, right? Like, I'm not going to change how we do things here. That's been proven. 5 finals, 3 titles. I'm not going to change anything for a James Wiseman, for a Jonathan Kuminga, for a Moses Moody. There is a level of what I've done is proven, and to ask me to change what I know is proven at a winning level for rookies and for players who are unproven, there is a level of context there, which is fair. And also what you said earlier about CP3, CP3 is good enough to adjust to. Like, partly why I think it's going to work out between Steve and CP is because Steve understands that Chris Paul is a proven player. He's a multi-time All-Star. He's a guy that's been the steals leader for years, assist leader for years. He is a proven player at the highest level. And so I can see Steve adjusting his offensive approach for Chris Paul because he is worthy. He has that credibility to be adjusted for. Whereas a guy like, and there is a level of ego to that. Like, there are some coaches that would adjust to a James Wiseman. There are some coaches that would be willing to adjust to rookies and young players. Steve is simply not going to do that because it would offer credibility to drafting them in the first place. It would justify and co-sign, it would be an endorsement of those choices. And he didn't want rookies. He didn't want young players. He doesn't want them. He wants vets. He wants championship players who are proven. We know this. So with Chris Paul, I think there's a much greater likelihood that we see him be more flexible and accommodating to what he does best. And that's the pick and roll. So great points, guys. Great points. All right. Expectations. So I'm just going to kind of go through this and then we can kind of wrap it up with the team projection. I have like a team projection next year. So expectations, develop young players. Now it's funny because his track record suggests that
Jonathan Kuminga.
What's up? Oh yeah, Jonathan Kuminga, exactly.
No, I just my weakness with Steve Kerr was the freaking short leash with Kaminga last year. That was one of the things that really pissed me
Oh
off
yeah, I
last year
mentioned
when
that.
it
I
came to
mentioned that.
Steve Kerr,
Yeah,
because it
TJ.
was like Kaminga showed me, especially through a 4-game stretch, he averaged like 20 points a game. I'm like, let the kid blossom, especially this year. Like, I don't want to hear excuses for Kaminga. The dude's going into year 3. Let him flap his wings.
100% TJ. No, I mentioned that earlier. Exactly. Like, we need Steve to develop the young players. We need him to, and again, his track record may not suggest that he is the best at doing that, or that he necessarily embraces those coaching responsibilities. But for us to win a championship next year, he's going to have to make a conscious effort to play Kaminga and Moody, integrate a second unit that's new, that's fresh, that's young. And when you have a backup shooting guard like Moses Moody, when you have a backup small forward like Jonathan Kaminga, they're going to have to be prepared, and they are vital pieces for any championship run we make, right? Because coming into next season, they will have to be a part of the 8 to 9 man rotation that we run. So there's no doubt in my mind that Steve understands this. He said that he failed the group in terms of connectivity last year. And so part of being, part of connecting the group is getting the young players, not just the young players, but all the players up to speed so that they're ready when the moments are biggest. And he didn't do a good job of that. And a lot of that had to do with his failure in developing the young players that were on the roster. So next season, I expect him to do a much better job with that, right? Because if we have the same situation as last year in terms of guys not getting playing time, seeing DMPs, two ways, getting run over them in critical, crucial stretches of a game, and they just simply don't have a stable progression over the course of the year to be prepared for the playoffs, then that's a huge indictment on Kerr, because he understands that coming into next season, this is the roster he'll be handed, and so he's going to have to be, he's going to have to get the guys ready, and that also includes, like I said, the young guys. So the next thing I said, and I kind of referred to this earlier, is updating the playbook. You gotta make the playbook more diverse, more layered, more creative, right? We can't keep running, the same bread and butter sets that we've been running for the past decade. Now, obviously, certain things are going to be staples and pillars of the offense, certain actions and sets that set us up and put us in the positions to score the ball, and with multiple counters and options out of them, of course. But there needs to be more variety within the playbook, and different things we can go to, different looks that we can generate. So we can have different options. And they kind of spoke on this, they being Steph and Steve, that we didn't have enough of that against the Lakers. And that's partly why we lost, is that we didn't have enough variety and diversity in that Lakers series from an offensive standpoint. So one of the things that, and Sun God actually mentioned it earlier, was Spain pick and roll. Spain pick and roll is basically one of those sets that have a variety of counters, where you got Chris Paul or Steph, running off a ball screen, a high ball screen, kind of downhill in the mid-range area, with Devin Booker being within Phoenix, and then DeAndre Ayton cutting to the middle. And on the Warriors, it would be Klay Thompson or possibly Moses Moody, and then a guy like Draymond or Jonathan Kaminga cutting down the middle. And so then once you have these options, now you can say, okay, if the defense overplays the shot, then I'll have the mid-range. If they overplay the lob, then I'll have the three-point shot. And if they overplay both, then that means that I have the open mid-range. So obviously, like, you have multiple options out of a Spain pick and roll, right? The mid-range, the kick out off the curl, or the lob threat that's cutting down the middle. And so this is something that can be used with the personnel we have, right? These involve motion concepts with the curl, with cutting down the middle, and then of course the ball handler going downhill. So there's just a ton of options and counters out of that. And that's one example of a set that Chris Paul's familiar with, having run it with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. Like I said, CP3's exceptional at the mid-range, and he can pass, whether it be a lob to Ayton or a kick out to Booker. So there's a bunch of different counters you can go to, and that's, again, one example of a play that he can add. And then experimenting. I expect Steve to experiment next season, try out different rotations, adjust on the fly, just try to be more open to different lineup combinations and just tweak different things to see what fits and what works. Obviously last season we didn't have as much versatility as we'd hoped, and it felt like at times we just were very limited in terms of who we could put out there. I feel like this season we have a much more layered skill sets, guys that like Dario Saric and Chris Paul. Obviously Kaminga is going to take that step. So we have a much more layered personnel, much more variety that we can go to. And I think that's a big deal because when you look at his rotations and the combinations and the adjustments he was making in 2022 when we won the championship, those were some critical, changes that he made throughout the year to see, well, does Otto Porter fit at the 5, right? Does Otto Porter fit at the 5? Does he fit in this lineup next to Draymond? How does he look? Can we rebound? And then you look at a guy like GP2, like what kind of plays can we run with him? Does he fit next to Steph? Is there enough shooting around them to make these combinations work? Like a bunch of experimenting, a bunch of combinations and adjustments. And at times it won't be pretty. Like, do not get it wrong. Like, don't get it twisted. There will be moments where it looks ugly. It looks, broken. It's not seamless. It looks, disconnected. But that's part of the process. It looked like that in 2022 as well. But we were able, because we had such a a broad degree of players we could go to, right? JTA, Damian Lee, GP2, Otto Porter, Bielitsa, right? We were able to tinker and tweak different lineups and different things to see what worked best. And then that way, when the playoffs came around, we were able to just know and have a good feel for what lineups to run, given time, situation, score, all that. So I expect a lot more of that next year than last year, because last season, as fans, we were not happy that Steve didn't play certain guys enough. Next season, if we're complaining that he's playing certain guys too much, I think that's a good thing, because then that tells me that he is, he's trying different things out. He is trying to get a feel for what works and what he can take into the playoffs, right? That's kind of what he uses the regular season for. And then a big one, establishing a defensive identity, right? That we have to get back to being an elite level defense. Gang rebounding, which is a concept that we've used a lot of. So just having multiple bodies on the glass, because we are a smaller team, we're not that athletic. So having multiple guys, put that conscious effort in to rebound, box out, put a body on the line, and be physical, that kind of thing. So we need more of those efforts next year, and I think Steve needs to emphasize that from a defensive standpoint, and then as well as defending without fouling. Right? We mentioned earlier we were the worst team in the NBA in terms of fouling. Right? We fouled the most, and we have to learn how to defend without fouling, put our guys in the right spots so we can slide our feet, show our hands, and funnel either to Draymond or to Wiggins, and then rotate and close out on a dime. And so for that to happen, we're going to need reps, and we're going to need to emphasize defensive concepts, versatility, and different schemes we can run. So we can go to a zone, we can go to man-to-man, we can go to ice coverage, right? We can go to drop coverage. Like, we have to be more versatile in how we approach the defensive side of the court. And that's on Steve. That's on Steve to emphasize these concepts, right, in terms of defending without fouling and rebounding, as a team, as a unit, but also putting together, the right and the appropriate defensive matchups and approach, right? The schemes based on who's in front of us, right? We can't be putting Klay Thompson on De'Aaron Fox to start game 1 of the playoffs like we did last year, right? Andrew Wiggins coming off the bench. You have to be more prepared than that. You have to be, more proactive in putting your guys in the right positions, so we're able to, get off to a good start and hit the ground running. So that's definitely a big thing. And then the last expectation that I listed was just overall connecting the group. And that's something that he said that he failed at, right? We've seen the quotes, we've heard it all. Like, Steve kind of, looked on last year and said, look, I just did a poor job of putting guys in the right positions, of connecting the group all together. I didn't do a good job of that. So he understands that and he's aware of that, and that's good. That tells me that next season he's going to be more equipped and more proactive in actually correcting that early on, so he can put everybody in the right positions and then build on that. It felt like we weren't building all year, right? It felt like all season long we were almost catching up or chasing something, right? Chasing a top 6 seed so we don't, fall into the play-in, or catching up to another team or to another point on the standings. Like, it never felt like we were actually building or building on something. In the 2022 season, we were actually building off of an 18-2 start, and we kind of had something we could hang our hat on in terms of like a level of play we could sustain and that we could look at and say, look, this is the team that we could get to. This is the level we can get to as a team. And so when you look at those things, like, it never felt like we actually built on anything last year. And we need to get back to establishing a defensive identity and then connecting the group so we can build on that as the season goes on, right? And the key is we have to get off to a good start and we have to hit the ground running so that once we are able to do that, you're able to build off of it and improve and develop as the season goes on, as opposed to getting off to a poor start and then having to catch up and not necessarily developing and getting better as a unit, right? Because instead you're just desperate to catch up and not fall into the play-in or out of a particular seed. So we need to be more aggressive with starting off strong, and that's on Steve Kerr, right? Does anyone want to add anything to that, like in terms of the expectations for next year? Do you think I missed anything? Like, is there anything that you expect that I didn't mention, or anything you want to add to what I did mention, or you think I hit on everything?
Yeah, I think you definitely hit it. I just want to see them come out and fucking punch teams in the mouth like they did when they went 18-2 to start the season.
Okay, perfect. All right, then last slide. Let's get to my team projection for next year. Okay. So next season, I have our record at 55-27. I think we're gonna be a top 2 or 3 seed. I actually didn't put the seeding in. I should have done that. So I think we'll be a top 3 seed for sure. I think next season I see us at being the number 3 seed or so at 55 wins.
3 seed Terry.
Possibly 2 seed, depending on how the league kind of shapes out. Right? You
I got
remember
Sacramento in the 1 seed, Andre.
So last season, right, the Kings were the number 2 seed at 51 wins, and the Nuggets were the number 1 seed at 53 wins. I actually think the league is going to be a little bit more lopsided this year. I think there'll be a little bit more or a little bit less parity. I think we're going to see the Nuggets, the Warriors, and the Lakers kind of separate as the best teams out west, and the Suns, right? So the 3 or 4 best teams are going to be the Nuggets, Warriors, Lakers, Suns, and it'll be in some sort of order. And I see us being in that mix. I think we're going to win 55 games or so. You can add or take away a couple of wins, right? It could be 56, 57. It could be, 52, 53, 54, right? But I expect us to win somewhere in the low to mid 50s, right? Around the 52, 54 mark is what I have us at. But 55-27 is my prediction. If things go right, this means no injuries. This means and obviously there will be injuries, right? So I mean no long-term injuries, right? So if Steph's out for a couple of weeks, of course. But if Steph's out for a couple of months, then obviously this prediction is not necessarily reflective of that. This prediction is more so reflective of if Steph plays around 65 games and if everyone plays around that, game total. Now,
he played 65 games last year.
Exactly. I have the 65 game mark is kind of what I'm looking at. And so I think we can win 55 games overall next season or so, be a top 3 seed. Offensive rating, I have us at number 7. I think 115.8 OR. I think the 7th ranked offense is very possible given that we were number 10 last year, right? Number 10, which is pretty impressive given how disconnected we were, given how just overall we never really could put it together as a unit in terms of chemistry. So I think we can build on that, adding Chris Paul, limiting turnovers, running more pick and roll, and saving possessions. I think it's very possible that we have a top 7 offense next year. The defense, I think, is going to be the big thing that we get back to. I think we'll be a top 4 defense. Last season, we were about 113 or so, damn near 114 defensive rating. I think we'll be around 111 which would be around 4th, 5th next season. So I think we'll be a top 4 or 5 defense, and I think we'll get back to an elite defensive team that we've been. In 2021, we were top 5. In 2022, we were the best, right? So it's definitely very possible that we end up winning, or we end up being a top 5 defensive team, and winning a bunch of games because of what we hang our hat on. Net rating, I have us at about a +4, +5 team, right? +4.5 or so, which is 3rd, right? So about top 3 or 4 net rating in the NBA. I think we're going to be a pretty dominant team. I don't think a lot of teams can have the talent we do, right? We have just a lot of talent out there. Steph, Clay, Draymond, Wiggins, CP3, right? And then you got really good role players like Kevon Looney, really good role players like Dario Saric and GP2, Jonathan Kuminga. So we're just going to have a lot of talent every night, and it's going to be difficult to beat us. And so I think we're going to just be a dominant team, top net rating team, probably, around 3, 4 or so. And I have us at about 4.6 there. I think our floor, as shown last year, was a 2nd-round exit. And I was kind of debating whether it was a 1st-round exit or a 2nd-round exit. But I think everything that went wrong that could possibly go wrong went wrong last year. And so if that's the worst that can happen and we're a 2nd-round exit, I can't imagine anything worse going wrong than what went wrong last year. So given that, I think the floor, if we're relatively healthy, of course, like unless some freak injury happens, if we're relatively healthy, I think our floor is a 2nd-round exit because everything went wrong last season from a chemistry standpoint, locker room standpoint, all of those things, right? We were disconnected. We had guys out for extended periods of time. We were one of the worst road teams, and we still made the 2nd round. Obviously, that's not what we want. That's a failure, but that's the floor. That's the floor I'm going to give it because we probably could have lost to the Kings, but at the end of the day, Steph Curry didn't allow us to, dropping 50 in Game 7. So I'm going to give him that respect and say I don't think we'll ever be a 1st-round exit under the Steve Kerr, Steph Curry player or coach-player dynamic. I just don't see that happening. I think 2nd-round exit is the absolute worst. And then I think obviously the ceiling, I have us at a championship. I think we're a championship team. I think the expectation should be a championship. I expect Steph, Clay, Draymond, Wiggins, Chris Paul to come into the season in championship level shape, with a championship level approach and mentality. And that goes for Steve Kerr as well. I expect Steve Kerr to coach like a championship level coach. Next season, I expect the role players to fit in, given their skill sets. I think we signed the right guys. I think we signed players that are going to complement the system and complement our stars, with Dario Saric, with GP2 making that trade last year. Obviously, Kuminga taking that 3rd-year step, which we all are hoping for. I think given all of these factors and moving parts, I think last season we won 44 games. And we left a lot of games on the table. We dealt with a lot of bad injury luck. We didn't really have that great of a roster. We were playing a lot of G League players. It's not crazy to me if I'm saying we're going to win about 10 more games than that. About 10 more games than last year, right? The 55 wins is a rough estimate. It could be 52, right? I just have us at around anywhere from 52 to like 57, right? And that kind of falls at around 55. So I think on the higher end, if we're relatively healthy, if we really get off to a good start and things go really well, 57's in the mix. But if maybe we're a little bit less healthy and we're resting games and load management, and maybe a couple players are out, and it takes a little bit of time to develop and to integrate players, and there's some growing pains, maybe we're closer to like 52 wins or something, 51, 52. But I think the sweet spot for me is about 55. And I think our ceiling is a championship level team. We have the veterans to do it. We have the young players that are going to, they're integrated already. They have 2 years under their belt. Moses Moody, last season, not even last season, for a matter of fact, 2 straight seasons, has proven to be a playoff riser. And so I expect Steve to carve out consistent roles for them during the regular season, them being Moody and Kuminga. I expect the veterans to come into camp in shape, to hit the ground running to start the season. And I expect, all last season, everybody on the timeline was saying this is an unserious team. I think next season we will be a serious team. That's my opinion. This is my projection. And if anybody has any thoughts or disagreements, or whatever on stage or in the chat, let me know, and I'm willing to discuss it.
That floor needs to be championship. It needs to look just like the ceiling. That's all.
That's fair. I thought about that too. I was like, if, but you know what? At the end of the day, there is a world where the Chris Paul fit is not necessarily optimized. There is a world where
Not this one.
Jonathan Kuminga doesn't take that third-year leap. So I have to account for like things not going as planned as well, which we'll see. But you're right. Like I do think if what's supposed to happen happens, I don't see us not winning the title.
Championship. And
Yeah.
that playing. We don't care about that playing, by the way. There's no prediction for that.
We're
But
not
hey,
talking about play-in, Peter. We're talking about 3-seed Terry.
in the chat, anybody think, anybody agree, disagree? Like, in the chat, put your predictions next season for the win total. Like, what do you guys think? How many games do you think we're gonna win? And let's see. I want to see if it like matches up with mine. Shadow, Urkel, anybody want to add anything or think that 57,
Yeah, I have them at 53,
53?
and that's just because of I think like Memphis is being they're a good regular season team. But yeah, other than that, I agree.
Someone's
61.
Someone's on their mic is on. If they can mute. Okay, there you go. So you said Sun God, you said 53. I think that's
TJ?
I think that was TJ. Sun God, you said 53, right? That's a fair prediction. That was I think the Nuggets won that last year about 53 games. They were the 1 seed. What do you think so if we win 53, how many games do you think we'll win? I mean not what seed do you think we'll be?
I think we win 57 games, and I think we're probably the second seed.
So 57 second seed.
I'm right with Bede. 57 second seed.
57 second seed.
But my
2-seed
prediction,
TJ, let's go.
my prediction is with the assumption baked in that Kuminga is going to get almost a Jordan Poole level leash this season. I don't want to say that in a bad with a bad tone or any bad outlook. I mean it in a very positive way. And I think that he's going to take a massive jump.
Championship Jordan Poole.
Exactly. I think he's going to be the X factor for us this season. I think he's going to be undeniable. Chris Paul is going to unlock him, and especially with the fact that we haven't really signed any wings, I think that the organization is going to entrust him to grow, and I think he's going to be unlocked offensively, and I think he's going to continue to grow defensively. He's going to be such a huge X factor for us off the bench. He's going to be in closing lineups, and he's going to we know we talk a lot about the margins. He's going to expand the margins. He's going to literally widen what the margins mean this season. And I think it's going to contribute to some win share. So I got us as 57 wins, 2 seed, baby.
So 57, 2 seed. Sun God, you said 53 wins. What seed do you think will be? Top 3? Top 3 or so? Let me know.
2-seed TJ, baby. Let's
I'll
freaking
also
go.
say this though, just because I have us winning 57 games, I don't think that like Phoenix or whoever Denver's winning 60 games. I think they win like 59 games. I think it's gonna be cool.
That's fair. So AK said 57, CJ said 52, 50. I see 53. Let me go up. 53, 60, 57, 50, 56, 57, 54. Okay. 50, 52, 61, 52, 51, 58. So Shadow said 58. 58. Awu said 51, 61. Second seed, 55. Okay, yeah. So, some people are more optimistic. So 30 Burner said 56. TJ said 56. Let Ray Cook, 56. Yeah, okay, 58. Okay, you don't think so? Big Warriors doesn't think anyone's winning 58. PT says 59. Forest City, 57. Certified Ice, 52.
Dre, my thing is like let's just
Nakmon,
be
52.
my thing is let's just be logical about the situation. What did we win last year? 45 games?
We won 44.
44 games. Wiggins missed more games than we won. That's all I gotta say. Let's just be honest with ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
There is no possible
True.
way that Wiggins doesn't account for minimum 10 games.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it-
Like,
facts.
if,
I
if you
agree.
have Wiggins out there instead of Anthony Lamb, come on, man. Like, come on, man.
53. Yeah, so
What the
I'm seeing
fuck are we doing here?
a lot of people have it around the same. A lot of you guys say around, low 50s, mid 50s. Some people think it'll be high 50s or even 60. I don't think that's crazy either. I think the ceiling of this
Brother,
team.
listen to me and listen to me good. You got to bet BMW money on the fucking Warriors. Like, let's fucking go. That
60,
BMW
65.
money. Let's freaking go.
Absolutely, TJ. No, I'm optimistic next year. I think we have a championship team. Obviously, I thought that last year, but nobody could account for kind of the trials and tribulations we had to undergo. I think next season, given the mentality, the mindset, the motivation, and the approach change that seems to be coming, I think I'm fairly confident that a championship is definitely in sight.
And another thing I'm banking on too is that the bench is going to be much better
Right.
without the starters. When the starters take a rest day or like they aren't playing a game or somebody gets injured, I think that the dudes on the bench will be able to step up in those roles.
100%. Okay, I think I got everyone's thoughts. Anybody want to add anything, or anybody forgot to mention something? Now's your time. If not, Urkel, do you wanna give your prediction, and then we could go to your space, or your playback?
I have them because I factor in injuries and all of that stuff. I have them about 53.
53. Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. 53.
Yeah.
Someone asked. 30 Burner asked, do you have any Warrior players winning an award? I don't, but what I do have is okay. Well, I'll say this. I do. The only award I have us winning is Chris Paul Six Man. Now, I will say this. Now, Jonathan Kuminga is going to be in the running for most improved. I just think there's a bunch of players that are going to get more run than him that I don't think he'll get enough minutes to win that award, but I think he'll be in the conversation. And then the last thing I'll say is Draymond Green is going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year discussion once again. 100%. I believe that in my soul.
Has there ever been a unanimous six man of the year?
I don't, not that I know of, no.
I got Chris Paul as the first unanimous six man of the year.
Oh,
I think
wow.
he's probably going to give you like 12 and like 7 off the bench on like a high plus minus, and they're going to be forced to give it to him.
So it's funny. You asked Shadow. Shadow said 58. Urkel says 53. And I'm literally smack in the middle at 55. So very fascinating stuff here. And this was definitely a fun little exercise just to kind of go through last season, rehash what happened, and kind of project kind of our expectations for the coach, but also for the team overall next year, man. So this was definitely fun. CJ said 50. CJ up next said 58. So for sure, man. Yeah. So we can move to Urkel's now. But hey, I appreciate everybody for coming in and sharing their thoughts and tapping in, bro. This was really fun to do. This was probably more fun than any player profile because like there's more stats involved and there was more like observations involved as opposed to just numbers and that kind of thing in terms of just like individual stuff. Like I could look at the overarching numbers and the overarching conclusions and observations and kind of takeaways from that standpoint and really summarize what we saw last year and what we can expect next year. So definitely fun. Obviously, none of this stuff is like expert level predictions, whatever. Like this is just our best kind of this is our best estimation of what we believe will happen. So don't obviously take anything as like gospel, but I do think these are very fair and realistic expectations for next year. I do think that. So, hey man, let's head to Urkel's, and I appreciate everybody for coming through and tuning in once again, man. Peace out.